The marina invoice listed my boat as transferred and removed from my slip. The key fob I'd used for years no longer opened the gate. The harbor master asked if I wanted a copy of the handover receipt. I met him because he returned my dinghy. A storm had dragged it loose overnight, and he hauled it back onto the dock before dawn. I arrived to find the lines coiled neatly, the outboard rinsed, the seat cushion laid out to dry. He didn't wait for thanks. Left a note under the windshield wiper with the tide time circled and his number, in case it happened again. It didn't, because after that he checked the lines for me. He was younger and worked the docks between contracts. Not a captain. Not a salesman. Someone who knew where boats failed quietly. He showed up when I was late, when weather shifted, when I forgot a detail that mattered. He didn't tell me what I should do. He did things that made it easier not to worry. I spent weekends aboard and weekdays in the city. He learned the pattern and filled the gaps. Replaced a chafed hose before it split. Bled the fuel line. Texted photos when he was done, the engine bay clean enough to trust. When I traveled, he checked the bilge and sent the reading without commentary. The closeness grew from permission, not romance. I let him sleep on the settee once when fog rolled in and the ferry shut down. He left before the sun burned through, coffee cups washed, deck dry. Another time he brought parts one hadn't ordered and fitted them without asking, then handed me the old ones and said to keep them if I wanted. I didn't. When the marina announced new access protocols, he handled it. Said the office was slow and he was already there. He dropped off forms with my name printed correctly. Highlighted the one line that needed a signature. It was just contact information, he said, so the dock crew would know who to call if something went wrong while I was away. I signed at the chart table, tide book open beside me. We started eating together on board. Simple food. He cooked like someone who didn't waste motion. He never asked where I'd been before him. He asked where I was going next and whether the weather would hold. There were details that didn't catch. The marina clerk greeting him first. A package of parts delivered to his locker instead of my slip. An invoice forwarded to me already marked paid, with a note that it was easier that way. The first night we slept together wasn't framed as a change. It followed a long day tightening things that had loosened over time. He fell asleep early. I woke to the sound of him checking the mooring lines, methodical, careful. When he came back, he didn't climb into bed right away. He stood listening to the water until it settled. After that, he kept a spare jacket aboard. Not clothes, just a jacket. He didn't move anything of mine. He knew where everything was anyway. When I mentioned selling eventually, he didn't encourage it. He asked what mattered most about the boat. I told him stability, familiar water. He nodded like that was an answer. The paperwork came later. A marina update. New insurance requirements. Temporary authorization for someone to act on my behalf if I couldn't be reached offshore. He'd filled it out already, careful with the spelling. Said it was routine now. Said it reduced delays. I signed without reading it closely. The engine was warm. The lines were tight. The weather was good. The invoice at the office said the transfer was complete. The harbor master slid the receipt toward me and asked where I wanted the remaining gear sent. I told him I'd need a minute. He said the authorized contact had already arranged delivery. I stepped back from the counter, phone in my hand, watching the slip where my boat used to be. Empty water rocking against a cleat that no longer had a line tied to it. He didn't answer when I called. Not immediately. I walked the dock instead. Past slips I knew by number. Past boats I'd watched age and refit and change hands. My slip was already reassigned. A smaller hull sat there, unfamiliar lines, different cleats. The dock felt narrower without my boat breathing against it. He texted a few minutes later. Said he was on the water. Said reception was bad. Said everything was okay. I asked what had been transferred. He said the marina account. The slip assignment. Temporary custody while things were sorted. He said it was procedural. He said the boat was safe. I asked where it was. He said it had been moved upriver to a quieter berth. Less traffic. Less wear. He said he'd show me when I had time. That night, he cooked aboard a friend's boat. Not mine. He brought food in a cooler like nothing had changed. He talked about wind patterns and engine hours and the way the season was shifting. He didn't mention the transfer unless I asked a direct question. When I did, he answered calmly, briefly, like we were discussing tide tables. He said the marina had pushed for a single point of responsibility. He said they preferred someone on site. He said I was traveling too much for their comfort. He said it didn't affect ownership. I nodded. It sounded reasonable. We slept together again. Not out of closeness. Out of habit that had already formed. He left before dawn to check lines that were no longer mine to check. The next day, an email arrived from the marina, addressed to him. I was copied. Confirmation of reassignment. Access credentials updated. Any further correspondence to be directed to the listed operator. I was listed as owner of record. Lower down, in smaller type. I forwarded the email back to the marina and asked to clarify. The reply came from him before they answered. He said he was handling it. He said there was no need to confuse people mid-season. He said the important thing was that the boat was maintained properly. He sent photos. The hull clean. The cockpit dry. A new line tied neatly. He said he'd replaced it because the old one was worn. He said he'd kept the old one just in case. The closeness thickened in small ways. He remembered what I drank without asking. He knew when I'd be tired before I said it. He brought charts he thought I'd like. Marked coves he thought I should see. He never invited himself along. He assumed I would ask. I didn't ask. When I did get time, he said the boat was undergoing routine checks. Nothing serious. Just alignment. He said it would be better if I waited until it was finished. I trusted him with timing because he'd never rushed me before. A package arrived at my apartment. Dock gear. Fenders. A spare anchor. Items I recognized from the boat. He texted to say he'd brought them over so I wouldn't have to carry them later. He said he was consolidating. I lined them up by the door and told myself this was temporary. The marina gate still didn't open for me. When I asked the harbor master again, he said everything was in order. He said the operator was very thorough. He said it was nice to see someone take such care. He asked if I needed help getting my things back. I said not yet. That evening, he suggested we take a short trip once the weather cleared. Just the two of us. He said it would feel good to be back aboard together. I said yes because I wanted to believe that was still possible. I didn't ask which boat he meant. The trip happened before I saw the boat. He picked me up early, said the weather window was short. We drove north along the river, past marinas I didn't recognize. He talked about currents and traffic like he was easing me into something familiar. When we stopped, it wasn't at a slip with my name on it. It was a private dock behind a low building, quiet, no office, no posted rules. The boat was there. Clean. Fueled. Lines new. The name still mine, painted on the stern the way it always had been. For a moment that was enough. I stepped aboard without thinking, muscle memory carrying me down the steps. Everything smelled right. Oil. Salt. Sun-warmed fiberglass. He watched me take it in like he'd been waiting for approval. We pushed off smoothly. No paperwork. No gate. The river opened wide and calm, and for the first time since the marina office my chest loosened. He moved around the deck like it was his job, checking things I hadn't asked him to check. He handed me a coffee from the galley without comment. Out on open water, he told me the truth in pieces. The marina had insisted on a local operator. Insurance pressure. Seasonal policies. He said he'd stepped in so I wouldn't lose the slip entirely. He said he'd taken on responsibility because someone had to. He said it was all reversible once the season ended. He didn't say he'd done me a favor. He didn't need to. We anchored in a cove I liked. He knew it. Said he'd marked it months ago. We swam. Ate. Lay in the sun with nothing between us but the deck. It felt like the old rhythm had returned. Like the interruption had been a misunderstanding. That was how the midpoint arrived. Not as conflict, as comfort. After lunch, he pulled out a folder from under the NAV table. Thin. Plastic sleeve. He said it was something the insurer needed while we were out. Just confirmation that I was aware of the arrangement. That I consented to him acting on my behalf if something happened while we were underway. He said it was standard. He said it protected both of us. The boat rocked gently. The water slapped the hull in a way that made everything feel contained. I glanced at the page. My name. His name. Language I'd already seen versions of. Temporary. Operator. Authority in transit. He held the pen out, not watching me, giving me space to decide. I signed because I wanted the day to stay intact. After that, things shifted without moving. He started answering calls while we were still on the water. Short ones. Efficient. He gave updates I didn't understand but didn't question. When we returned to the dock, a man was waiting. He shook his hand, not mine. They spoke about schedules. About next steps. I stayed on the boat, rinsing salt from my hair. On the drive back, he said it was good we'd done that. Said it simplified things. Said now there wouldn't be confusion if I was unavailable. He said the river didn't like indecision. The next morning, an email arrived from the insurer. Addressed to him. I was copied. Coverage confirmed. Operator authorized. Effective immediately. Later that day, the marina emailed too. Slip termination finalized. Transfer processed. Any remaining personal items to be coordinated with the listed operator. I forwarded both messages to him with a single question mark. He replied quickly. Said this was expected. Said it was cleaner this way. Said we'd talk through everything soon. Soon didn't come. What came instead were updates. Maintenance scheduled. Storage arranged. Fuel accounts consolidated. All things that made sense individually. Together, they formed a shape I hadn't agreed to but had enabled. When I asked when I could take the boat out alone, he said not yet. Just until the paperwork settled. He said it was better if there was one hand on the wheel. I believed him because the water had been calm when I signed. I believed him because nothing had broken. I believed him because I was already standing on the other side of the decision, watching the shoreline recede. After that, my role narrowed without anyone naming it. He stopped asking when I wanted to go out on the water. He told me when conditions weren't right. He'd already checked. He'd already decided. When I suggested a morning run before work, he said the engine was scheduled for inspection. When I suggested the weekend, he said traffic would be heavy. He said we didn't need to push it. I stayed on land more than I noticed. The emails kept coming. Forwarded. Summarized. Paid. Storage confirmations. Fuel accounts updated. Dockage fees rerouted. He didn't hide any of it. He filtered it. Presented the conclusions. When I asked for originals, he said everything was digital now. I tried to log into the marina portal from my phone. The password reset went to an email address that wasn't mine. I assumed it was his and closed the browser. We still spent time together. Dinners. Evenings walking the pier. He pointed out boats he liked. Boats he thought were built better. He talked about maintenance the way other people talk about aging bodies. Calm. Practical. I listened because I always had. The first time I felt the distance was small. I ran into the harbor master at a cafe near the docks. He asked how the transition was going. I asked what he meant. He said the changeover. Said it was smooth. Said the operator was very organized. He congratulated me on making a smart decision. I didn't correct him. That night I asked what the plan was. Not accusatory. Just a question. He said there didn't need to be a plan yet. He said we were in a holding pattern. He said rushing things was how people made mistakes on the water. I asked when I'd get my access back. He said I still had access. Just not the kind that caused confusion. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask him to explain. The next weekend he went out without me. Texted photos. Sunrise. Wake trailing clean behind the stern. Said the engine purred. Said the river was empty. He said he wished I'd been there. I believed him. On Monday, a courier delivered a small package to my apartment. Inside were my charts. The ones I'd marked by hand over the years. Folded neatly. He texted to say he thought I might want them close, since he'd updated the onboard navigation. He added that paper wasn't reliable anymore. I put the charts in a drawer and didn't open them again. When I tried to visit the boat on my own, the dock gate wouldn't open. I waited until someone else passed through and followed them in. My boat wasn't there. I stood at the edge of the slip until the water stopped moving. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Said he was busy. Said the boat had been moved again. Temporary. Safer location. He said he'd explain later. Later became an hour. Then a day. That evening, he came over with food and a calm face. He said he understood why I was unsettled. He said this kind of thing happened when assets were involved. He said it didn't change us. He touched my shoulder the way he always had. Familiar. Steady. I let him stay. In the morning before he left, he asked if I trusted him. I said yes because at that point it was already true. After he walked out, my phone buzzed with an automated message from the marina system. Operator access confirmed. Owner access restricted pending review. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, realizing that the water hadn't changed at all, only where I was allowed to stand. After the restriction notice, the days filled with explanation without access. He kept showing up. Still cooked. Still checked in. Still talked about the river like it was something we shared, even when I wasn't near it. He said the review was routine. He said these things always tightened before they loosened. I asked who was reviewing it. He said insurance. Marina. Storage. He said systems didn't like ambiguity. I stopped going near the docks. Not out of avoidance. Out of irrelevance. There was nothing there for me to do anymore. When I passed the river on my commute, I caught myself scanning the water for a hull I knew wouldn't be there. He began talking about timing. About seasons. About how boats aged faster when they were idle. He said it was better to keep things moving. He said the worst damage came from waiting. I didn't disagree. One afternoon he asked me to forward him a document. Title copy. Just to have everything in one place while the review was ongoing. He said it would speed things up. I found it in my files and sent it without comment. Later that day he forwarded me an email thread. Marina Administration. Insurance Liaison. Storage Facility. All aligned. He summarized the outcome in 3 lines. The boat would remain under his operational control until the end of the season. Then we'd reassess. Reassess what, I asked. He said everything. The next morning, a notification arrived from the storage yard. Inventory received. Items cataloged. Owner listed as me. Operator listed as him. Delivery request to be approved by the operator. I read it twice. When I asked why the storage yard had my things, he said he'd moved equipment out of the boat to protect it. He said it was standard. He said I didn't want my gear exposed if something happened. He sent photos. My life jackets. My spare lines. My tools laid out on a concrete floor tagged and neat. He said it was all safe for now. I told him I wanted my access restored. He didn't argue. He said he understood. He said he'd raised it already. He said pushing too hard could backfire. He said patience mattered. He stayed that night. Held me when I woke early. Made coffee the way I liked it. When I mentioned feeling disconnected, he said transitions did that. He said it didn't mean loss. I let that land because I didn't have language for what I was losing. The next message came from the insurer. Addressed to him. Copied to me. Operational authority extended pending compliance confirmation. No action required. I replied directly asking what compliance meant. The response came hours later from him, not them. He said it was technical. He said it was being handled. That weekend, I drove upriver alone, following the coordinates he'd once mentioned. I found the private dock. Walked the length of it. The boat wasn't there. I called him. He answered immediately. Said he'd moved it again. Said it wasn't safe where it was. Said he hadn't told me because he didn't want me worrying. I stood at the end of the dock, looking at empty water, and realized that every location I knew had been replaced by one I didn't. That evening, I found a printed document on my kitchen table. No note, just a single page. Temporary operating agreement. Continuation clause. Seasonal authority. My signature was already there. I recognized it from the day on the water. Same ink. Same slant. I didn't remember this version. When he came back later, I asked when we'd talk about it. He said we already had. He said this was the outcome. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I asked when it ended. He said it depended on how smoothly things went. I asked what happened if they didn't. He said that wasn't something we needed to imagine. That night, he slept beside me like nothing was unresolved. In the morning, I woke to another notification. Fuel account transferred. Billing contact updated. Owner copied. I lay there listening to him shower, understanding that everything connected to the boat now moved through him first, including me. The call came from the bank, not the marina. They wanted to confirm receipt of sale proceeds and asked where I wanted future correspondence sent. The account number they read back wasn't mine. The representative said the instructions had already been provided by the authorized operator. She asked if I was calling to dispute them. I said no. She thanked me and ended the call. I found him at the apartment that evening. He was packing gear into duffels laid out neatly on the floor. My gear. He looked up and said the buyer wanted a quick handover. Said it was better this way. Clean. No dragging things out. I asked when the sale happened. He said it closed that morning. I asked why I hadn't been notified. He said I was copied. He showed me the email on his phone. Forward it. Buried under a subject line about seasonal adjustments. My name listed below his after the greeting. The attachment was the bill of sale. Signed. My signature was there. I didn't remember signing it. He said we'd talked about options. He said I hadn't objected. He said timing mattered on the water and hesitation cost money. He said the price was good. I asked where the money was. He said it was being held temporarily. He said distributions would be calculated after expenses. He said we'd settle it once everything cleared. I asked to see the account. He said that wasn't necessary right now. I went to the docks the next morning. Not to reclaim anything. Just to see where the boat had been. The slip was full again. A different hull, unfamiliar lines. The harbor master greeted me politely and asked if I needed help with a new reservation. I said no. At home I packed the things I still had. Charts he'd returned. A jacket he'd never worn. The old line he'd said he kept just in case. My phone buzzed with notifications I didn't open. Sale confirmations. Storage closures. Account updates. All addressed to him. All copied to me. The final message from him came that afternoon. He said the season had turned faster than expected. He said these things happen when people weren't ready to let go. He said I'd thank him later for making it decisive. He added that he'd left my personal effects with the storage yard. I could collect them anytime. He said to bring ID. I drove there and gave my name. The clerk nodded and rolled out a cart with 2 small bins. Charts. Life jacket. Tools. No engine parts. No logbook. No keys. I signed the receipt and left. That night, I stood on the riverwalk and watched boats pass. Their wake spread, then disappeared. The water didn't hold shape. It never had. The boat was gone. The slip was gone. The season was gone. What remained was the quiet knowledge of how easily motion could be mistaken for care, and how smoothly permission could turn into removal without ever raising its voice. I went home without keys that matched anything on the water, and slept without the sound I'd learned to trust.